What's up, gorgeous? I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to another episode of the Fierce Framework, where we talk about becoming fierce through messy action, baby steps, and cultivating your confidence. I'm your host, Mary Beth. I'm an ADHD kid with a dream to see more women living lives that we're excited about. I want to see us breaking out of the mold society tells us we're supposed to fit into and start living life more on our own terms, where we're in line with our values, we're pursuing our purpose, and we're making our dreams turn into realities. What's up, gorgeous? I'm so glad you're here. Today, I want to dive into talking about the gap that so often we encounter between our goals and our everyday lives. Noticed that a lot of the time we have a hard time achieving our goals because we don't have a solid idea of what it takes to get there, right? So it's you have your everyday life, right? And you have your routines and like whatever you're doing, whatever you're spending your time on day to day. And then oftentimes, like, especially when you're newer to goal setting, right? You set this like big, exciting, lofty goal, and right, you want to accomplish it, of course. And maybe, it's in alignment with what you feel like your purpose is or what you want to be doing, but we don't always know like how to get there. Um, like realistically, which I kind of hate that word, but it's like in the day to day, like what those baby steps look like, if that makes sense. So I want to get into that a little bit and talk a little bit more about like how to break things down because I think it's so powerful to figure out how to get to those goals, right? And a lot of that is like reverse engineering. You're thinking about where you want to be and you're picturing that like end result, and then you see where you are and you're like, okay, so if I work backwards from where I want to be to where I am now, like what are those steps and what are those things that I'm gonna have to do, right? Um, and so I find what's helpful is like identifying milestones and kind of or like landmarks, right? Like not maybe not micro, but many goals within the goal so that you have smaller, more concrete chunks that you're working towards. And all of that, of course, is going to add up to the big goal, but it gives you like smaller kind of bullet points, right? And or milestones, whatever it's easiest to like think of those as to work towards on your way to that goal. And there's a lot of reasons for those. It gives us a reason to like stop and celebrate, right? And to recalibrate and maybe redirect and give ourselves the opportunity to kind of like check in and make sure that we're on the right track, that these steps that we're taking, these actions that we're doing are in the right direction of like where we want to go and to take a second to celebrate how far we've come and what we have done. And yeah, we still have a long way to go, but like look at what we've done and what we've accomplished, right? And so to kind of take that second to acknowledge your progress and have a little celebration, right? And rebuild that motivation and that momentum to keep going. So I think that kind of pausing and having like mini goals or landmarks, milestones built into your journey is powerful for a lot of reasons, right? So those kind of check-ins, make sure you're still on the right track. This is still what you want. Um, a reminder to stop and celebrate, right? And then to kind of just check in and be like, how is this going, right? Like, are there different things that I need? Am I needing to pivot or do I need to keep doing what I'm doing? So that you're being kind of cognizant and aware of how you're doing on that journey, right? You're not just like a pawn that you're moving along this road to your goal, right? You're a whole person, and the whole point of the goal is for you, right? So you want to check in and like see how you're doing and if this is sustainable for you, if you need more support, if you need to kind of tweak things like what's going on and checking in with yourself so that you have that information for the next leg of the journey. So, breaking it down is super powerful, right? Because like if you've never run in a marathon before and you want to run a marathon, maybe you're going to break it down and your first goal might be a 5K and then a 10K and then it's like okay, maybe a half marathon, right? Or maybe not as It doesn't have to be like that separate. It could just be instead of like literally signing up for a 5K and a 10K and a half marathon and like doing those things and having them like be really big achievements on their own. That's really powerful and a great way to do things. And it doesn't work for everybody, and that's totally fine. So maybe you're not entering a 5K and entering a 10K and like officially doing all those races, but you're going to run those miles in practice, right? So regardless of how big and kind of separate you make those sub goals, like those little mini goals that add up to that full big goal of running that marathon, whether those are like parsed out and like specific achievements by themselves and like races that you're entering, or whether those are a little more private and maybe those are goals that you're hitting, milestones that you're hitting, road marks that you're hitting, right? Like in your practice by yourself. Regardless, you're still breaking it down to kind of build up to that ultimate goal of the marathon, right? And so that's the same way with so many of these goals that we're setting. For example, if you're looking to make $100,000 in your business, amazing, great goal, right? That's gonna look different if you hit 90,000 last year versus if you haven't made a dollar yet, right? And so it's like if your goal is that $100,000 and you haven't made a dollar yet, then that first mini goal, right, is make your first dollar. Like hit that hit that achievement and hit that mini goal and then see how that goes and what it took to get there, right? And then your next goal, right? Whether that's 50 or 500 or 5,000, like whatever it is, breaking it down is going to make it, for me, it helps make it like more real because I can only, and I hope this is relatable, right? But I can only really wrap my head around a goal that's so big, right? I think some of us have a hard time conceptualizing what a goal really encompasses, unless it's like we've kind of gotten to like 50 or 80% of it, right? If it's something you've never done before, it's really hard. You can like picture it, right? And you can think of how you want to do that, but it can be hard to like really feel like you have a handle on it and what all goes into that unless you've experienced like part of that goal. So, for example, I would love to like live somewhere warmer for like maybe 3 months, 6 months out of the year, right? Because I live in Colorado and it's beautiful in the summer and it's beautiful in the winter, but I don't love the cold. So I'm like, how amazing would that be if I could like live somewhere else while it's cold here? That would be incredible. But I've never lived abroad. And I hadn't been out of the country by myself before. And so last year when I did my trip to Belize, like that was one of my like landmarks. That was one of my milestones is to get out of the country by myself, by a beach, and be there for a while, And 3 weeks is a lot different than 3 months, but it's also a lot different than 0 days. So something like that where it's like, okay, because I was thinking about it, I was like, would I even like that? Would I get bored? Would I get too hot? Would I get tired of being surrounded by sand, right? And it's like you don't fully know until you've had a chance to kind of dip your toe in or really see how things are? I mean, that would be more drastic if you've never been to a beach before, right? Like I've been to beaches, I've spent days at beaches, but like 3 weeks, that felt like a solid milestone, right? And so when you're thinking of these goals, and for example, like, the $100,000 goal, right? Maybe you're breaking that down into 20,000, 40,000, 60,000, or, whatever it looks like. It helps us be able to identify the steps to get to that goal when when we have like a portion of that goal, a milestone, if you will, or like a mini goal that we can really like wrap our heads around and conceptualize and understand and kind of know how that's going to feel and like what goes into that. So that's part of why I think it's so powerful to break these goals down because sometimes when a goal is like so big and lofty, and especially if it's different than your current experience, it can be really hard to have an idea of how you're going to get there. But if you're able to break it down, like I have no idea how to make $100,000, right? But maybe I have a pretty good idea of how to make 5,000. So we start there. You got to make your first 5,000, right? And then once you do, you've had that experience and you've been there and you've done that, right? And so now, as that's kind of easier to wrap your head around, you can set the next milestone of, 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000 or whatever that is, and then you're working towards that. Because I do believe that as we experience things, we're able to kind of imagine and conceptualize the next step or two, right? And we're able to kind of see in our mind's eye a little further. But we it depends on your goal. So if it's way out there, you might not be able to conceptualize the whole thing. And so I want to encourage you, if you can't, say you want to write a book, right? But you haven't written a chapter yet. It might be really hard. You know you want to write a book, and that's amazing. That's an incredible goal. I'm not trying to talk you out of that goal, right? I want you to get to that goal. And I believe one of the powerful tools to get to that goal is to break it down and go, all right, so that's what, 10 chapters, 12 chapters, or however many pages, or whatever that looks like, right? Or even a breaking it down to like, I need to write an outline, and then I'm going to flesh out the outline, and then I'm going to edit it, and then I'm going to, those are all mini goals as well. And that's one of the things that I think is so cool. Like you can break it down to whatever makes sense for you. If you're wanting to organize your house, right? It's up to you if you want to start in the kitchen or if you want to start in the bedroom, right? But either way, however you break it down, breaking it down is going to help you get there. Because the whole house, like that's huge, that's overwhelming, right? And like you can picture, you want your whole house organized. It's not that you can't conceptualize the goal, but the actual like nitty-gritty of how are you going to do that? It's like, okay, well, I'll start in one room and then I'll do all the rooms, right? And then by the end of however long, like it's going to be done. So breaking it down, choosing a room, and then doing the work, right? So one of the critical steps, right, is the fact of breaking it down. That is hugely important. Again, for those reasons that we talked about, like, and one of them really being able to kind of like get your head wrapped around it and like, okay, organizing the whole house sounds amazing, and it's like, yes, I know I want that incredible, great goal. And then you start like, oh my gosh, how do I actually do that? And then, like for me, right, that's when the overwhelm starts coming in. That's when the what like analysis paralysis and the executive function goes out the window, and you're like, it's overwhelming, it's too much. I don't even know where to start. And then it's like I'm tr just trying not to shut down at this point, right? But when it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna start in the bedroom. I can get a better handle on that and kind of wrap my head around what that's going to look like and what that's going to entail and what that's going to require when I'm choosing a room and starting there. And then you can break it down even further and be like, all right, with dresser, closet, floor, whatever is kind of messy that you want to go through and organize, then you can choose one of those things and do it one at a time. Because even a room can be a lot and can be overwhelming. And this, how much time you have is a huge part of this. And I know it's super common with us ADHDers that we're like, we want to tackle the whole thing and we have the best intentions. And I'm like, I'm going to organize my room this today, right? Like I'm just gonna do it all today. And then maybe you have experience with this, right? You get like halfway through, or you get everything pulled out of the closet and it's all over the floor and everything's a mess. And then it's like midnight. You got distracted, maybe, or maybe you didn't. It just took that long, right? It's midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. You're like, I can't finish this. Like, I have work tomorrow. I have things to do. Like, and then you're just left with a disaster, right? Right? Hopefully that's not just me. But if we're able to choose, like, we're going to do the dresser first, and then maybe even one drawer at a time, right? So then what this works out to is if we can make those steps manageable, then we can build progress into our routine. And I believe that is the biggest disconnect between our goals and our everyday life is, especially with a new goal, we don't know how it works into our daily routine. And so then it doesn't. And then we're not making progress toward it, right? If I want to have a podcast, great, amazing. But how am I going to have the podcast, right? So it's like I need time set aside to record. I need time set aside to edit. I need time set aside to do like show notes and then, sometimes if you follow me on social media, you already know it's hit or miss with like the marketing and the snips from the podcast that, you pull from the podcast and you like put it on social media as like a little advertisement, little taster, right? You may have noticed like I don't always do that. So it's like that is not something that's in my routine, and so that is something that gets missed sometimes, which for me is okay. For me that's like icing on the cake, that's gravy, that's extra. I don't care. What matters to me is that I'm getting the podcast out, and so that's the priority, and so that's what happens. The extra is just that. It's extra. That's bonus content. That is bonus material. But for the longest time, like I didn't have the podcast like in my routine. So it was like, how do you even do this? Right? And I think that is so common. Um, if you're with the organizing thing, right? Like you can't organize the whole house in a day. So if you want to organize your whole house, how is that going to work in your day-to-day life? Right? So you have to break it down. You're like, okay, we're going to do one room at a time. Amazing. And then we can break each room down, right? And so now if I'm doing a drawer a day, or even if I'm just starting with a drawer, then it's like, okay, I'm going to go through this one drawer and I can do that. So when you're breaking it down into steps that are manageable, then you can incorporate it into your daily routine. Because I think that is like, that's what it boils down to is how are you going to work this into your daily or weekly routine so that you're consistently making progress on it, right? Because if I wait until I have time to organize my entire house, guess when that's going to happen? Never. I don't have time to organize my entire house. But if I'm breaking it down, I have time to spend 15 minutes a day working on the drawer number one. And then when drawer number one is done, I can work on drawer number two. When drawer number two is done, guess what? And then you go through the drawers. Boom, now the dresser's done. Then it's like, okay, now I've gotten in the routine of having 15 minutes a day set aside to work towards my goal of organizing my whole house, right? And it doesn't have to be 15 minutes a day, right? This is just something I pull. So maybe it works better for you to do a drawer a day, or maybe it works better to do a chunk every week, right? So maybe it's not your daily routine where you're doing 15 minutes or a drawer every day, but maybe you're going to do the dresser one weekend, and then you're going to do the closet the next weekend, and then you're going to do the armoire next weekend, right? And then you're going to then maybe you're done with the bedroom, right? And you're moving on to the kitchen. And then you're going to do the pantry, right? So there's a myriad of different ways that we can break this down. And I think that might be like why it gets glossed over because it's like the experts are like, well, you'll just figure it out at that point because it's so arbitrary and it's really like whatever works for you and whatever you're going to be able to stick with. But regardless of why we don't talk about it enough, I don't think we talk about it enough. So here I am. I really think that that is such an important gap. It's like we have these goals, amazing. How do I get there? And it's like, well, you have to work towards it every day or every week, like consistently. So maybe not literally every day. Some of us might need every day, right? Just to like stay in that routine, and that's fine. Like that, this is where you have to know yourself, right? So if you need that daily, then amazing. Do that. If you don't, if it maybe it's a calendar reminder is going to work for you and you do, 3 days a week or whatever. For me, right, when I started going to the gym, I was like, I'm not going to go every day. Like, I just know how I am. I'm not going to go every day, and then I'm going to start feeling like I'm failing, and then I'm going to get overwhelmed, and then I'm just going to want to quit because I'm going to be discouraged, right? And I was like, 3 days a week doesn't seem like enough. Like that doesn't seem like worth it. But I kind of like rationalized with myself, and I was like, yeah, but it's doable, and I really think I can stick with 3 days. And I've been sick the last couple weeks, but I did really well, like going to the gym 3 days a week because I was able to work it into my routine, right? There sometimes I have meetings after work. Like sometimes I'm doing things. I want to go out with my friends, right? Like I don't want to have to I'm not going to miss a party for a workout. Like I'm just not that's not my personality type, right? But if I have my 3 days set aside and then maybe something happens one week, I have 2 other days in the weekday, like not even the weekend. Like I have 2 other weekdays where I can move that workout for that week, right? And so it just allows me a lot more flexibility. So then it works with my schedule and then I'm able to stick with it and then I feel better about sticking with it. And so I'm more likely to stay with it because that's how my brain works, right? So whatever your routine looks like, it doesn't have to be every day. And again, with like the organizing example, maybe you have like a chunk on Saturdays where you can work on your goal. And so maybe like you have a chunk on a Saturday or a Sunday, right? And like that's when you're writing and that's when you're working on your book or you're working on your project. Or maybe it works better for you to do daily, right? Or maybe it's both. Maybe you have more than one goal, right? And you're like, I'm organizing a little bit every day. And then my Sunday afternoons, like that's when I work on writing my book. Amazing. The point is, look at your routine, look at your daily life and figure out where can I find time to consistently work towards this goal. And so it's the combination of breaking the goal down into steps that are small enough to fit into your routine, right? You can't, uh, I can't, or I'm not going to run a marathon every weekend. Like that is not, that is not what's going to work into my routine. But you could maybe run a 5K every weekend, or maybe run 5 miles every weekend, right? Or maybe you're running a couple miles every day, or maybe you have, a different thing where it's like you do 2 miles on Monday and 10 miles on Saturday, like whatever, right? The point is your consistency doesn't look like doing the whole goal all at once. You're not running a marathon every weekend, but you are working towards the marathon. You're working on that conditioning. You're doing a smaller step. So, you're doing a few miles, whatever that looks like, and you can do that every weekend or, during the week, every day, whatever. So you want to break it down small enough to where you have time and capacity to work on it and make progress towards this goal in your regular day to day, week to week routine. And so the breaking it down and then making the time for it in your routine, those are the two critical things that work together for you to make steady, consistent progress. Because it has to be small enough to work on, right? And then you have to be working on it consistently. And that is, in my experience, like what makes it the most likely that you're going to hit a goal. And one of the things I struggled with for years, and I think it's totally normal ADHD thing, is like you just want to do it. You want to take one big leap and you want to put one big hurrah into it and like do the goal all at once. And so what I found myself doing was I was waiting until I had like enough time to make a difference. And so it was like I would wait and put off the organizing until I had a big enough chunk of time where I was like, yeah, I can organize my whole room in this chunk of time. So I would wait for a weekend that was free or, a weekend that I didn't have plans, but like, all right, that this is the time. Today's the day. Or like that's when I'm gonna do it, right? And then you go gung ho and you dive all into it and everything's out on the floor and you're going through the entire thing and you're trying to knock it all out in one day. And then I learned the hard way that that doesn't always work out well for me because sometimes things come up, right? Or you run out of steam or it's way more involved than you realized and you're like, "Oh, it's gonna take more than a day." And you're like, what the heck? And everything's a disaster, right? Because you pulled everything out of the closet. Now it's all over the floor. And it's 2 a.m. And you're like, I need to go to sleep, bro. And then it's a disaster. and then it's emotional and it's stressful and it's overwhelming, right? But if I don't have to wait for one big weekend where I can do one huge hurrah and put a ton of effort into it all at once, if I can spend 15 minutes a day working on organizing my room, drawer by drawer, section of the closet by section of the closet, whatever that looks like, and then I can make consistent progress, and then I'm able to be working on that in my daily routine, in my weekly routine. And then, looking back after a couple months, couple weeks, whatever, you can really see the progress. And that is another reason why, like, identifying and setting those milestones can be really powerful too, because that's one of the things as an ADHDer that I hate is doing the thing, right? You're like, I've been going to the gym 3 days a week for a month, like nothing seems different. Because when you do the slow and steady, you don't necessarily see a huge change. And so that can be really discouraging. So, what can be helpful is setting those landmarks or like setting those goalposts and then stopping and acknowledging and celebrating that, hey, you've gone through, the whole dresser drawers, you've gone through three drawers or whatever it is, or you've gone to the gym 3 days a week for a month. Like that's an accomplishment. And stopping to acknowledge that accomplishment to keep going because you're not always going to have the results as the encouragement. Because when you're going slow and steady, you don't have like a huge result overnight because you're going slow and steady. But I believe that that slow and steady working progress toward your goals into your routine has the biggest payoff in the long run because you actually finished things, like you actually accomplished things because you're doing this and you're not waiting for some miracle where you have a whole weekend open to then finally organize your room, right? Because what is the likelihood of having a whole weekend? Then you're waiting and waiting and you're pushing it off and you're taking no action towards it. And then all of a sudden, when you have some free time, you have to remember that that's your goal, right? And then you jump into that. And best case scenario, you are able to complete the whole goal in that allotted period of time. Amazing. But it still took you how many, 6 months, right? Because you were waiting and waiting and waiting for an open weekend. In my experience, I'm much more likely to like actually do the thing if I can break it down and figure out how to work it into my routine and how to set time aside to be working towards that goal consistently, whether it's every day or every week or whatever it looks like, but where it's consistent and I'm doing it over and it becomes part of my life, right? Um, yeah. So those are the two biggest things that I want to talk about. And I feel like these are a couple of like It's it can seem so simple, but like these couple of concepts are some of the biggest like game changers in my planning workshop. That's what I got feedback on last year that like learning how to break the things down was such like a powerful tool and something that my attendees had realized was like missing from other programs. So I wanted to make sure that I'm putting that out there, that I'm sharing it with you guys. But if you want to get more into it, the Plan Your Year workshop, it's 4 hours and we start with a dream, start with a vision, and then we break down into concrete goals, and then we work through breaking those goals down into bite-sized pieces, and then literally calendarizing, like figuring out how is this working into your schedule so that you're identifying how you're going to be making steady, consistent progress towards these goals. Okay. So if you want to join me for the workshop, I would absolutely love that. But regardless, I wanted to share these concepts with you because it's been so powerful for me, and just so helpful. So I want to see you make your dreams come true and make those goals happen, regardless of whether or not we actually get to hang out. But if you do want to join in Colorado Springs, it is January 23rd. Friday is when we're meeting, and Friday the 16th is the last day to sign up. So I wanted to throw it out there that we do have deadlines approaching, blah, 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 right? Friday the 16th is going to be the last time to make sure you reserve your spot, and I will include a link in the description. Um, I just can't wait to see what dreams, what goals you're knocking out of the park. And if this is helpful for you, if you're hitting those goals, like I would love to hear about it. That would just light me up. It would be so encouraging just to hear that feedback and to see what things you're doing. So always feel free to hit me up. I'm at the Fierce Framework on social media. I'll include my link for the email newsletter in the bio. And until then, keep becoming fierce.